Max, hold on. Bob Miller's scream cut through the roar of the failing engine. The German Shepherd dug his claws into the cabin floor as the small Cessna lurched left. The 67-year-old pilot with 30 years of experience gripped the yoke. The altimeter showed 3,000 feet above the Alaskan mountains. Shit, 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 Bob muttered, trying to restart the engine. Max whined, sensing his master's fear. Snow-covered peaks of the Denali Range flashed past the windows. Suddenly, the engine died completely. The silence was more terrifying than the roar. Only the whistle of wind through the wings and the dog's heavy breathing. Bob switched the radio to emergency frequency. Mayday, mayday. Flight in 2847. Engine failure, making emergency landing. Static. No one answered. Below stretched endless taiga, dark green spruces cut by white scars of rivers. No hint of civilization anywhere. The nearest airport was in Fairbanks, 200 miles away. All right, boy. Bob glanced at Max. This is gonna be rough. The dog seemed to understand. He lay down on the floor, pressing against the cabin wall. The ground rushed up fast. Too fast. Bob picked a relatively flat clearing between trees, maybe 300 yards long. Not enough, but no other choice. Trees flashed by on both sides like black spears. The landing gear caught the top of a spruce. The plane jerked violently. Bob felt blood drain from his face. Hold on. Impact. The world became chaos of metal and glass. Bob felt sharp pain in his shoulder as he was thrown forward. Max yelped. Then, silence. Bob opened his eyes. The cabin was tilted to the left side. Snow blew in through the shattered window. Blood trickled into his eye from a cut on his forehead. Max, his voice was hoarse, barking from behind. The dog was alive. Bob tried to move his right arm, a flash of pain. Broken or dislocated. With his left hand, he found the emergency kit under the seat. Signal beacon, first aid, knife, lighter. He switched on the beacon. Red light began blinking on the instrument panel. Help, if anyone's looking, he muttered. But who would look? His flight wasn't officially registered. Private charter to deliver medicine to a remote settlement. If he didn't show up in 2 days, maybe someone would worry. Max crawled closer, shivering from cold. Bob checked the thermometer, 15 below Celsius. It would be colder by night. He unbuckled his harness and carefully turned around. Max licked his face. The warm tongue felt like a blessing. Good boy. Now we need to. The sound of a breaking branch outside made him freeze. Something was moving around the aircraft. Something big. Bob stayed motionless, listening. Max perked up his ears, whined quietly. Then came growling, low, barely audible. Bear. Damn, Bob whispered. December. Time when bears should be sleeping. But this one seemed awake. Heavy footsteps circled the plane. Bob felt in his pocket for a signal flare. One chance to scare the beast away. Suddenly Max jerked his head up. Not toward the bear, in the opposite direction. The wild scent hit his nostrils with something else. Something that made the hair on his neck stand up. Behind the plane was not one, but 2 bears. And they didn't look sleepy. They were hunting. Crack. The sound of splintering metal made Bob's blood freeze. Something massive pressed against the plane's tail section. Max bared his teeth, hackles raised like black needles. Easy, boy, Bob whispered, reaching for the flare gun. His broken shoulder screamed in protest. The first bear appeared at the pilot's window, a massive brown male, scarred muzzle pressed against the cracked glass. Yellow eyes locked with Bob's. Not curiosity, hunger. Jesus Christ. Bob's hand found the flare. One shot. Miss, and they're dead. The bear's paw slammed against the window. Spider cracks spread across the safety glass. Another hit would shatter it completely. Max lunged forward, barking furiously. The sound echoed in the cramped cabin like gunshots. The bear pulled back, startled. That's my boy. But the respite lasted seconds. Heavy breathing came from behind. The second bear circling to the cargo door. Bob heard metal groaning under massive weight. The temperature gauge read -18. Getting colder. Without the engine, the cabin would become a freezer within hours. But staying meant becoming bear food. Leaving meant freezing to death. Bob tried the radio again. Static. Think, he muttered. The survival manual said make yourself big, make noise. Hard to do with a busted shoulder in a crashed plane. Max suddenly stopped barking. Ears forward, body rigid. He stared at something Bob couldn't see through the rear cabin window. What is it, boy? The dog whined, not fear, but recognition. Max had spent 5 years as Bob's co-pilot, flying to remote settlements across Alaska. He knew wilderness sounds better than any human. Bob strained to listen. Underneath the bear's heavy breathing came something else, distant but growing closer. Voices. "Help!" Bob shouted, ignoring the pain in his chest. "Help!" The first bear's head snapped toward the sound. It backed away from the window, confused. Bears avoided humans, usually. Max barked once, sharp and commanding. The kind of bark he used at the airport to alert Bob to incoming aircraft. Through the trees came flashlight beams. 3 of them, moving fast. "Over here!" Bob yelled. Plane crash. The voices got closer. Male, speaking something that sounded like. That's not English, Bob realized. Russian? The border wasn't far. Poachers, maybe. Or worse. The first bear lumbered toward the approaching lights. The second one circled behind Bob's wreckage, invisible but close enough to feel its breath on the wind. Max pressed against Bob's good side. The dog's warmth felt like life itself in the freezing cabin. Shouts erupted from the forest. A gunshot cracked through the air. Then another. The bears scattered. Bob heard them crashing through underbrush, moving away from the lights. 3 figures emerged from the tree-line. Not rescuers. Bob's heart sank as he saw their gear. Military-style clothing, assault rifles, faces covered by ski masks. The lead figure approached the plane. Tall, broad-shouldered, moved like someone accustomed to violence. American. The voice was heavily accented. Russian, definitely. Bob hesitated. Wrong answer might mean death. But Max was shivering harder now, and Bob's vision was starting to blur from blood loss. Yes. Pilot. Medical emergency. The Russian said something to his companions. One of them laughed, not a pleasant sound. You see nothing here. Understand. Bob glimpsed their equipment through the broken window. Not hunting gear. Communication equipment, expensive optics, something that looked suspiciously like. Understand. The Russian stepped closer. Max growled low in his throat. The sound that meant serious trouble. Bob noticed the Russian's hands. Dark stains that weren't mud. Fresh blood under his fingernails. I understand, Bob said carefully. The Russian studied him for a long moment, then nodded to his companions. We help, but you remember, see nothing. One of them pulled out a medical kit, while the other kept watch. Professional, efficient. These weren't random poachers. As they worked to extract Bob from the wreckage, he caught a glimpse of their gear more clearly. Satellite phone, GPS units, and something that made his pilot's blood run cold. Military-grade explosives. Max suddenly jerked alert, staring into the forest beyond the Russians. His body went rigid, the way he did when sensing aircraft before Bob's instruments picked them up. Something was coming through the trees. Something the Russians hadn't expected. And from their sudden tension, Bob realized these men were running from something too. The lead Russian spun toward the forest, rifle raised. Blyad, he hissed. They found us. American Border Patrol. The voice boomed through the forest like thunder. Searchlights swept between the trees, turning night into harsh day. The Russian leader cursed in his native tongue, shouldering his rifle. Move. Now. Bob felt rough hands grab his good arm, hauling him from the wreckage. His broken shoulder exploded in pain. Max bounded after them, staying close to Bob's side despite the chaos. Wait. Bob gasped. My gear. No time. The Russian's accent was thicker now, stress bleeding through. They have helicopters. As if summoned by his words, the distant whoop 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 of rotors echoed through the mountains. Getting closer, the 3 Russians moved like a military unit. One leading, one supporting Bob, one covering their rear. Professional. Deadly. Bob realized these weren't smugglers or poachers. These were soldiers. What the hell are you people doing here? Bob demanded between gasps as they half-carried him through knee-deep snow. Shutting up would be smart, the leader replied. Max suddenly stopped, ears pricked. He stared back toward the crash site, hackles raised. What is it, boy? The dog whined, then barked twice, sharp, urgent. The warning bark Bob knew meant immediate danger. Bear, one of the Russians said, following blood smell. But Bob knew Max's signals. This wasn't about bears. No, Bob said. Someone else is at the plane. The Russian leader held up his fist. Everyone froze. In the distance, they heard voices, American accents, professional, coordinated. Search the wreckage. Check for survivors. "Sir, we've got tracks heading northeast. Multiple subjects, one injured." The lead Russian motioned his men closer. Rapid conversation in Russian. Bob caught a few words. Extraction point. 20 minutes. Eliminate. Eliminate. Bob's blood chilled. These men weren't planning to let him live. He was a witness to something that couldn't be witnessed. Max pressed against Bob's leg, sensing the shift in mood. The dog's loyalty had saved Bob's life countless times during their flights. Now it might get them both killed. They moved deeper into the forest. Bob's shoulder throbbed with each step, leaving a blood trail any decent tracker could follow. Behind them, the search voices grew closer. "How much further?" the supporting Russian asked. 2 kilometers. Extraction point Delta. Bob's mind raced. Military extraction. These weren't just soldiers, they were spec ops. Russian special forces operating on American soil. Whatever they'd been doing, it was worth risking international incident. The helicopter noise intensified. Rotors beating directly overhead now. "Down," the leader hissed. They dropped into the snow as a massive searchlight swept across the forest canopy. Military chopper, Bob recognized the sound. Probably a Black Hawk from Fort Wainwright. Max trembled against Bob's side, but not from cold. The dog was reading tension from the Russians, preparing for violence. The light passed. The helicopter moved on. "Go," the leader said. As they struggled to their feet, Bob noticed something that made his pilot's blood freeze. One of the Russians was checking coordinates on a GPS unit. The display showed their current position and something else. A red blinking dot, moving toward them. "Fast." "Company," Bob whispered. The Russian saw what Bob was looking at. Their eyes met. For a moment, understanding passed between them. 2 professionals recognizing mortal danger. "Tracker," the Russian said simply. Bob's heart hammered. Someone had tagged him. During the rescue from the plane, someone had planted a tracking device. "Check him," the leader ordered in English. Rough hands searched Bob's clothes. They found it quickly, a small electronic device hidden in his jacket pocket. GPS tracker, military grade. The Russian held it up, face grim. "American intelligence." Bob stared at the device. "I've never seen that before." "Doesn't matter now." The leader crushed the tracker under his boot. But the damage was done. Their pursuers knew exactly where they were. Max suddenly stiffened, staring into the darkness behind them. A low growl rumbled in his throat, not fear, but warning. Shapes moved between the trees. Human shapes, closing in. "Contact rear," one of the Russians shouted. Muzzle flashes erupted from the forest. The night exploded with gunfire. Bob felt himself shoved to the ground as bullets whined overhead. Max yelped and dove for cover beside him. The Russians returned fire, their weapons lighting up the darkness. Professional, controlled bursts. These men had done this before. "Bob Miller," an American voice called through the gunfire. "Federal agents. We're here to help." The lead Russian looked at Bob with cold calculation. "They want you alive." Bob realized what that meant. To the Russians, he was now more valuable as a hostage than a witness to eliminate. "Move," the leader barked. "Use the old man as shield." Strong hands hauled Bob upright. A rifle barrel pressed against his neck. "Max," Bob called as they dragged him away. The German shepherd bounded after them, staying low, dodging between trees as bullets continued to fly. They reached a clearing where Bob saw their destination. A small helicopter, rotors already spinning. Military surplus, no identification markings. Extraction point Delta. But as they approached the aircraft, Max suddenly bolted ahead, barking frantically. Not at the helicopter, at something underneath it. Bob saw the wire a split second before the Russian leader stepped on it. "Stop!" Bob shouted. Too late. The explosion lit up the night like dawn. The shockwave slammed Bob into a tree trunk like a giant fist. His ears rang, vision blurred white. Burning helicopter parts rained down through the branches, hissing as they hit snow. "Max!" Bob's voice came out as a croak. Smoke filled his lungs, making him cough blood. Through the chaos, he heard whimpering, close, but moving. The dog limped toward him, left rear leg dragging. Shrapnel had torn through Max's thigh, dark blood matting his fur. But his eyes were alert, focused on Bob. "Come here, boy." Max collapsed beside him, panting hard. Bob pressed his good hand against the dog's wound. The bleeding was bad, but not arterial. They might both survive this, if they lived through the next 5 minutes. Gunfire erupted around the burning wreckage. American voices shouting orders, Russian curses echoing through smoke. Bob saw muzzle flashes through the trees. The firefight had intensified. Miller. Someone called his name. American accent, official tone. Bob Miller, can you hear me? Bob stayed silent. Both sides wanted him alive, but for different reasons. Neither felt particularly safe right now. Max suddenly tensed, staring into the smoke. His hackles rose despite his injury. Through the haze came a figure, tall, moving with predatory grace. Not American military uniform, not Russian gear either. The man emerged from the smoke like a ghost. Native Alaskan features, traditional hunting clothes, but carrying modern tactical equipment. He moved without sound, even in the snow. You the pilot? His voice was quiet, calm despite the battle raging nearby. Bob nodded, not trusting his voice. Samuel Takiewicz. Search and rescue. The man knelt beside Max, examining the wound with practiced hands. Good dog. Saved your life back there. How did you? Saw the wire. Your dog knew. Samuel's fingers found Max's pulse, checked his eyes. Border Patrol contracted me when your beacon activated. Been tracking you for 2 hours. Another explosion echoed through the forest. Closer this time. Both sides are hunting you, Samuel said. Russians want you silent. Americans want you talking. Either way, you're dead. Bob felt hope drain away. Then why help? Samuel met his eyes. Because your dog chose to warn strangers instead of running. That says something. Max whined softly, nuzzling Bob's hand. Even injured, the dog was trying to comfort him. Can you walk? Samuel asked. Barely. Good enough. Samuel helped Bob to his feet. There's a cabin 2 miles north. Off the grid. We can patch you both up there. They started moving through the forest, Samuel supporting Bob while Max limped alongside. Behind them, the firefight continued, Americans and Russians killing each other over secrets Bob couldn't even guess at. What were they doing here? Bob asked as they climbed a snowy ridge. Mining survey, Samuel said. At least that's what permits said. But mining teams don't carry military explosives. They crested the ridge. Below, Bob saw a small log cabin tucked against a cliff face. Smoke rose from its chimney. Someone was home. Max stopped suddenly, ears forward. He stared at the cabin, body rigid. What is it? Bob whispered. Samuel followed the dog's gaze. His expression changed. That's not my smoke. Through the cabin windows, Bob saw movement. Shadows passing back and forth. Armed figures. Russians? Bob asked. Samuel shook his head grimly. Worse. Chinese. Bob's blood chilled. 3 nations' intelligence services, all converging on this remote patch of Alaska. Whatever the Russians had been doing here, it was bigger than smuggling or poaching. Rare earth minerals, Samuel said, reading Bob's expression. Biggest deposit outside China, right under our feet. Worth about $50 billion. The cabin door opened. 3 figures emerged. Asian features, military bearing, weapons drawn. They'd been waiting. They knew we'd come here, Bob realized. Samuel nodded. Only shelter for 20 miles. Perfect ambush point. Max pressed closer to Bob, sensing danger. The dog's warm body was the only thing keeping Bob conscious now. Blood loss and shock were taking their toll. Can we go around? Bob asked. Not with your injuries. And not with them. Samuel pointed to the tree lean behind the cabin. More figures moving through shadows. They've got us surrounded. Bob looked at Max. The dog met his eyes with absolute trust. 5 years of flying together, countless emergency landings, storms weathered side by side. If this was the end, at least they were together. So what do we do? Samuel checked his rifle, chambered around. We do what your dog did. Make noise. Create chaos. Hope someone gets out alive. He pulled a flare from his pack, aimed it at the cabin. When I fire this, run for the cliff face. There's a cave behind those rocks. Your dog can find it. Hunting dogs always know caves. Max looked up at Bob as if understanding every word. On 3, Samuel said. 1, 2. A gunshot cracked through the air. Samuel jerked, stumbled forward. Blood spread across his back as he fell face first into the snow. Bob spun around. Through the trees came a familiar figure, the Russian leader from earlier. Somehow he'd survived the explosion. His uniform was torn, face bloodied, but his rifle was steady. Enough running, the Russian said in accented English. Max growled low, trying to shield Bob despite his injury. The Russian raised his weapon, finger tightening on trigger. But before he could fire, something massive crashed through the underbrush behind him. The brown bear from the plane crash emerged like an avalanche of fur and claws. Wounded, angry, and following the scent of blood through the forest. It hit the Russian from behind with the force of a freight train. The man's scream cut through the night as 1,000-pound predator drove him into the snow. Bob grabbed Max and ran for the cliff face, his broken shoulders screaming in protest. Behind them, the bear's roar mixed with dying screams and gunfire from the cabin. They reached the rocks as bullets whined overhead. Max, despite his wounds, squeezed between two boulders into darkness. "Good boy," Bob gasped, following. Inside the cave, they collapsed together in the darkness. Max curled against Bob's side, both of them shaking from cold, shock, and blood loss. Outside, the violence continued. But in the cave, Bob felt something he hadn't experienced since the crash. Peace. Until Max suddenly raised his head, ears pricked toward the cave entrance. Someone was coming. Heavy breathing. Slow, deliberate steps. Not human. The bear had found them. The bear's massive head appeared at the cave entrance, silhouetted against starlight. 800 pounds of predator, muzzle bloodied from the Russian's remains. Yellow eyes reflected the darkness as it squeezed through the opening. Bob pressed himself against the cave wall, Max trembling beside him. Nowhere to run. The cave was a dead end, barely 10 feet deep. The bear's breathing filled the space. Hot, rank, predatory. It had followed their blood trail like a dinner invitation. Bob's fumbling fingers found the last flare in his pocket. One shot, miss, and the enclosed space would become their tomb. "Easy," Bob whispered, not sure if he was talking to the bear or himself. The bear stepped closer, massive paws silent on stone. Bob could smell its breath. Recent kill, raw meat, death. He raised the flare with his good arm. The bear's eyes locked onto the movement. Max suddenly struggled to his feet. Despite his wounded leg, the dog positioned himself between Bob and the predator. A 60-pound dog facing an 800-pound killing machine. "No, Max, stay back." But Max wasn't backing down. Instead, he did something that made Bob's heart stop. The dog lay down, completely vulnerable, belly exposed, in the universal canine gesture of submission. Not to Bob, to the bear. "What are you doing, boy?" Max whined softly. Not fear, but communication. The same sound he made when trying to tell Bob about weather changes during flights. The bear stopped, tilted its massive head, studying the injured dog. Bob held his breath. Bears and dogs shared common ancestors. Did they share common language? Max whined again, different pitch. Almost conversational. The bear's posture shifted. Still alert, but no longer aggressive. It lowered its head, studying Max with something that looked like curiosity. "I'll be damned," Bob whispered. Max had read the situation perfectly. This wasn't a predator hunting prey. This was a wounded animal seeking shelter, just like them. The bear had been shot during the firefight. Bob saw the dark stain on its shoulder, matching his own wound. It wasn't hunting, it was hiding. Slowly, carefully, Bob lowered the flare. "Room for one more, big guy?" The bear settled onto its haunches, still watching them, but no longer threatening. Max crawled closer to Bob. Mission accomplished. They sat in silence, pilot, dog, and predator, all refugees from human violence. Then Bob heard it. Rotors. Helicopter approaching fast. "Bob Miller." Amplified voice echoed through the forest. "This is Colonel Martinez, U.S. Army. Respond if you can hear me." Bob looked at Max. The dog's tail thumped weakly against stone. "Here," Bob shouted. In the cave, searchlights swept across the cliff face. "Found the cave entrance. We see you. Stay calm, we're coming down." Ropes dropped from the hovering Black Hawk. Figures rappelled down. Army medics, not intelligent spooks. The bear rumbled nervously at the noise. Max struggled over, pressing against the massive animal's side. Somehow, impossibly, it calmed the predator. "Sir, we're gonna need you to come out slowly." The lead medic called. "Got a wounded dog and a very large roommate." Bob called back. "Copy that. We have veterinary support standing by." Bob looked at Max. 5 years of flying together. Countless emergencies. But this was their finest hour. "Come on, boy. Time to go home." Max limped toward the entrance, pausing to look back at the bear. The massive animal watched them go with something that might have been understanding. Outside, gentle hands lifted Bob onto a stretcher. A veterinary medic immediately began working on Max, starting in 4, cleaning his wounds. "He's gonna be fine," the vet said. "Tough old bird." As the helicopter lifted off, Bob saw the bear emerge from the cave, watching their departure. Wounded but alive. "Like them, sir." Colonel Martinez leaned over Bob's stretcher. "We need to debrief you about what happened down there." Bob looked at Max, now sedated and bandaged but breathing steadily. "Colonel, I was delivering medicine to a remote clinic. Engine failed. Dog and I survived a crash. Everything else." Bob met the officer's eyes. "Everything else is classified above my pay grade." Martinez smiled grimly. "Smart answer. There's going to be a lot of people wanting to talk to you. I figured. But first, medical leave. You and your partner have earned it." As the helicopter banked toward Fairbanks, Bob felt Max's warm flank against his hand. They'd survived international espionage, firefights, explosions, and an apex predator. All because a dog knew when to fight and when to make friends. "Good boy, Max," Bob whispered. "Best co-pilot I ever had." Through the window, Bob saw searchlights still sweeping the forest below. The fight for $50 billion in rare earth minerals wasn't over. But that was someone else's war now. Bob Miller was retired. At least, that's what he told himself as he noticed Max's ears prick up at a frequency only the dog could hear. Something was following their helicopter.